Hi everybody and welcome. I'm Terry Ryder, founder and managing director of hotspotting.com.au, and today I'm having a discussion with our guest presenter Miriam Sandkuhler about an issue that will be top of mind for many people thinking of relocating in our major cities or anywhere in Australia for that matter. I think this is a very timely webinar because of the changes that are taking place in our major markets like Melbourne and Sydney. What we know to be true at hotspotting is that while sections of the Melbourne market, for example, are winding down after a strong upcycle, there are still growth markets and many other precincts that are showing considerable resilience. But for those thinking of selling and buying elsewhere, it presents a particular dilemma. You may be able to buy well in the current market, but you're also selling your existing home in the same climate. So how do you manage this tricky process as you work your way through what we call the various life stages of buying property? One of the answers is to engage a skilled buyer's agent. And today we're fortunate to have as our guest presenter one of the very best. Miriam Sandkuhler is an award-winning buyer's agent and also a best-selling author and a property professional who has considerable experience in helping people through what she terms the 5 life stages of buying property. So Miriam, welcome.
Thanks, Terry. Nice to be here again.
Yeah, and I just remind our viewers and listeners before, Miriam, you get into your presentation that if they have any questions that pop up along the way, please key those questions into either the chat box that you should see in front of you or the Q&A panel that should be on your screen. And towards the end of the presentation, we'll go for 50 or 60 minutes today. The latter 10 or 15 minutes will be the Q&A opportunity. So please key in your questions and I'll put them to Miriam, or so I'll answer myself. So Miriam, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I'll start with the usual disclaimer, and I just want to say that throughout this presentation we're not providing tailored financial, tax, legal or property advice, and we strongly recommend that you seek independent accounting, legal, finance and property advice from an expert before embarking or actioning any of the information disclosed in the presentation. And obviously you're releasing and indemnifying us as the presenter should you choose not to take this advice. So with the legal stuff out of the way, let's talk about who we are and what we do. Well, we're what's known as an integrated property advisory firm, which means we do buyer and vendor advisory. So we work with buyers when we're buying for them, and we help advocate for the seller and help them select agents when they're looking to sell. So we basically work with Australians of all ages to help them buy and sell smart, and that enables them to help achieve their desired outcomes and seamlessly move forward into the next chapter of their lives, which is obviously what we're talking about today. So we find and buy high-performing homes for clients, and that's what I call an A-grade property that will outperform the market. We help people find the right property for their budget, and we help people sell their property when it's time for them to do so. Personally, I'm a licensed estate agent working as a buyer and vendor advocate. I'm an accredited property investment advisor, a media commentator. I've got a best-selling book and certainly got lots of award nominations as well. So today what we're going to talk about is the 5 life stages of buying property and what you need to consider at each stage as you work through those stages. So we will be talking and touching on first home buying, upsizing, what happens in a divorce, downsizing, and moving from your home into retirement, independent living or a nursing home. Now, one thing I will say, having experienced all of these stages and managed a parent into these stages myself, there's complexity at each step along the way, and it's not as simple as people would like to assume. So it's important that you either absolutely understand the process or you work with experts along the way to advise you. One thing we do know is there's been some recent research by Roy Morgan that found that 2/5 of us have not changed our home address in over a decade. So there was a myth that on average people would move every 7 years, and the research is showing that you can see here between 5 and 10 years, 17% of people have been staying in their home, and 41% of the population have been staying in their home for more than 10 years. So on average, 55% of the population are staying in their property for more than 5 years, but a substantial chunk is staying in for 10 years or longer. So that moving on average 7-year myth is getting a little bit out of date. And you can also see at the lower end that, not surprising, 2/3 of those who've lived in their home for less than 12 months are renting. And that's understandable if they've got no security over tenure because they don't own the home itself. And therein lies the motivation for those people to get out and buy their first home. Now, it's commonplace to talk about the market. Again, I just want to reiterate, particularly if you're a first home buyer and upgrader, there is not simply one national market. There are different markets, as Terry can attest to, in every city and every region and every state. There are thousands of markets and sub-markets. Prices can vary according to the suburb, the part of the suburb, the street in the suburb. Prices can vary according to proximity to amenity. Property performance varies according to supply and demand ratios, and the different buyer types and different tenant types. So again, lots of complexity. A lot of first home buyers are now starting to consider and relocate to regional areas, and what's driving that is affordability. But on a positive note, while you can potentially get into a regional area for 300,000 to 400,000 and buy your 3-bedroom home on a reasonable block of land, there's lots of infrastructure development happening. There are lots of employment opportunities. There's population growth. There's investment and there's tourism. So if you are struggling to buy your first home in and around a metropolitan city, seriously give consideration to the regional area, particularly those areas that are showing multiple of these growth drivers. And certainly I know in Melbourne, places like Ballarat and Geelong, with an hour commute on the train to Melbourne, and affordability there is substantially greater than Metro Melbourne itself. So have a think about that. If you're struggling to get into the market close to the Metro CBD as a home buyer, definitely give that some consideration and do some research. So let's talk about the 5 life stages of buying property. Well, there's first home buyer, and people often say to me, when's the best time to buy? Where in the market cycle should we be buying? The reality is, with the recent Royal Banking Commission, with APRA tightening lending, with banks getting really brutal on lending, my attitude is you buy when the bank will give you the money, because if they won't give it to you, well, you can't do anything. So that's the first thing you need to think about. Before you even start researching or searching on the internet and looking at where you want to go, absolutely go to your mortgage broker, absolutely put an application for a pre-approval in place, and understand what your budget is and what you have capacity to work with. And that's when you then go into the market and start your searching and researching. When you're upsizing, you know, again, that's often going from a small family to a larger family, or a single to a couple. In a softening market, you ideally want to sell first and then buy after, but of course it's subject to the speed of the local market at the time. So if you can sell high and buy low, that's fantastic, but you've got to have really good strong indicators as to how that market's performing. And sometimes, as Terry mentioned, there's resilience in sub-pockets of suburbs where you might in fact be selling and buying in the same market that's just as strong, or could in fact be going up. So it's really a case of, what are your personal circumstances? What's the urgency around the upsizing? What are your timeframes? What's your capacity to borrow money? And then how's the market acting, so that you know whether to sell first and then potentially buy, or buy first and then potentially sell. The reality is, when you're upsizing at any stage, there's always a risk associated with whichever direction you choose to go in. So it's understanding the pros and cons of selling first and buying later, or buying first and selling later. And again, the speed at which the market's operating and the conditions around the market will come into consideration. But the other thing, if you want to buy first and then sell, and you've done that in a softening market, you might struggle to sell. You might have to put bridging finance in place. You might have to rent your property. It might put you under financial stress. So that's things you need to think about if you're going to buy before you sell. And then, of course, if you sell before you buy, but the market's rising and you take too long to get back in the market, well, then you can end up paying more and having to either reduce the type of property that you're looking at getting in, or start compromising on suburb or things like that. So there's no one simple answer for any of this. It's really understanding the implications and understanding your needs and assessing it at the time. In a divorce scenario, obviously most people need to sell first before they buy. Again, you may not have as much flexibility around the speed of the market, because you might have to operate under court orders, but certainly in divorce conditions, there can be a lot of stress that goes on in a relationship. There can be a lot of mistrust that goes on. People can get stuck and not want to make decisions around reserves because they're emotionally attached to, you know, not wanting to leave their home. So that's certainly where a vendor advocate can help you independently work with you as a couple. So we'll talk a little bit more about that down the track. And then downsizing, same scenario. What's the urgency around your need to downsize? Is it because you've just got too much space and you absolutely want to have a smaller property that you can maintain? And you need to consider the local market that you're buying and selling in. Obviously, if you're downsizing and you're cashed up, it gives you greater capacity to buy into that same market and have really good bang for buck, or maybe not have to worry so much about the finance side of things because you are cashed up potentially. But again, you want to assess the individual circumstances at the time. And same with a retirement or nursing home. I know as our parents often get older, there can be resistance for them to transition into that kind of environment. One thing I'll absolutely say is if you're dealing with older parents, you absolutely want to make sure you've got some sort of power of attorney so that if they end up in a position without capacity to make their own decisions, rather than the state stepping in and state trustees taking over, you really want to give your family some certainty around the fact that, you know, it's really about you looking after their affairs and acting in their best interests, assuming you've all got a good relationship, and then you're in a position to work with them to potentially have a little bit more influence over what their needs are and how to help them best plan for it, and how to, you know, spend time years in advance talking about how they see their needs in the future and what they want their wishes to be and how they want them to be fulfilled. One thing I will say, going into those environments, we're not talking about owning the title to a property. Frequently you're talking about a license agreement to occupy. So it's a totally different ownership structure. Again, there's complexity around it. You do need to understand and get legal advice around it. And there are things like owners' corporation fees that have to be paid, and there might be a minimum number of years that you have to pay those fees regardless of whether your parent lives in that facility or not for that long. So again, there are tricks and traps within those sort of environments too, in an independent living situation. And then nursing homes are different again. So all I can say is make sure that you get some expertise and some advice along the way. And certainly when I did the nursing home thing for a family member who was interstate, I was able to basically engage a lady who locally acted like a buyer's advocate, but for nursing home facilities. So she was a great help to me. She was feet on the ground with the relationships with the agencies where she could do the hunting for me and present properties for me to consider for that family member. So those people are out there. There's not a lot of them, but I would encourage you to engage their expertise as well. So let's talk about the home seller's journey and potential mistakes that home sellers can make. So whether you're selling your first home to upgrade to your next one, or you're selling your second home to upgrade to your third, or even when you're downsizing, you are going to need to obviously put your property on the market. So some of the areas where I see people make the most mistakes is they often don't know the best sales method, which agent to engage and how much to pay them. Certainly the reality is every selling agent will tell you how fantastic they are. Every selling agent will have case studies that they can show you. But the reality is until you engage them and then see what happens after that, you don't know if you're engaging the good, the bad or the ugly in the industry. One thing I will say as a buyer's advocate, having worked with hundreds of agents over the years, the good, the bad and the ugly exist. And I think that's why it's important, and certainly why I started offering vendor advocacy, to make sure that the bad and the ugly don't get a chance to talk to my clients, and I only put, you know, good agents in front of them. And so agent selection is important. You know, you might pick the right brand agency, but you might actually have the wrong agent on the property. So that's another consideration. A lot of the time people unknowingly overspend on marketing campaigns because they're having a recommended campaign put in front of them. And I've seen totally inappropriate advertising spend allocated on properties that should never have that amount of money allocated to the marketing. So you have to be really careful about just using the minimum amount of marketing that you need to have your property attract the interest that it needs to attract. And by managing that, it can make thousands of dollars of difference to you as a seller. Sometimes sellers don't present the property for sale as best as they possibly could. And they also don't know whether they should be updating a property or repairing it or not. And that, of course, will be largely dependent upon who the prospective buyer is, what your price point is, whether or not it's a type of property that a buyer would like to potentially renovate themselves, or whether you're in a market where you want to present a fully renovated or partially renovated option, and a good agent will know and understand what the market wants there. So that's where vendors do make some mistakes. And there's also a difference between not understanding what the property's worth in the market versus what the vendor's personal needs are. So again, when I've seen people buy a property before they sell, they always have a fixed price in their head that they need X dollars to make sure they cover off on the new purchase. But if that's not where the market's sitting at the time, then you can actually end up with an inability to sell property or rejecting offers that are perfectly acceptable in market conditions at the time, simply because you're not understanding what's motivating the buyer versus where you're fixing a desired price at that could in fact actually kill the sale. And I've seen that happen as well. So sellers really need to be wary of that. The other thing is often they don't understand the pros and cons of a quote range. Now, certainly in Victoria, we had legislation come in where ranges now have to be estimated, and legislation's been put in place to stop underquoting. And often vendors don't necessarily understand the benefit of a quote range or how it works, so that's obviously where they need that explained to them clearly. Sometimes vendors don't know how to fill in an agency agreement, and what they don't necessarily do is understand or read the fine print and understand the implications of that fine print. So certainly as a vendor advocate, when I work with clients, we make sure that there's an agreement in place for a fixed period of time, but we also protect our client from being stuck in that agreement for a further 60, 90 days, particularly if it's an agent that's underperforming. You don't want to find yourself in that scenario, because you could really miss the best time in the market to sell, and there could be implications down the track as a result of that. So knowing and understanding the paperwork is important. Vendors can sometimes not agree on the price between themselves, particularly if this is a divorce scenario. It can make it very tricky to sell a property when you've got a couple that are arguing or at each other's throats. So again, if you're in that scenario, I recommend you really consider talking to an independent vendor advocate to help be that person between you. And also listen to that vendor advocate and the agent's advice around where the market's at, what changes have happened. Certainly I had an experience with a separating couple where from the time we estimated the price range to 3 months later, after the property had works done on it and we took it through a marketing campaign, the market had dropped severely. One of the vendors didn't understand that and was really holding firm on a price that was no longer valid. We brought an offer to the table that was an excellent offer, to be honest, and the other vendor accepted it. Unfortunately, on his side of the camp were siblings. One was a sworn valuer, the other one was a real estate agent, and they were thrilled with the offer. But because the other vendor rejected it before the auction, that offer fell over. The property consequently passed in at auction, and then everyone ended up selling it for $100,000 less than what they could have got a week earlier. So it's really important to try and manage emotion in this type of scenario, because emotion can lead to very costly mistakes. Not having a backup plan regarding settlement timeframes. You know, people say, look, I've sold my property, I've got 6 months to settle, but then all of a sudden they're 3 or 4 months down the track and in a panic about having to buy a property, and they haven't sorted out a plan B, and they don't know where they're going to live if they don't buy something. So always have something to fall back on, because it could even be that there's a problem or a delay with the property settling on the other person's side, and again you might be in a position where it puts you in a vulnerable circumstance. So really consider plan B if things don't go as you'd hoped. And again, where people don't agree on pricing or reserves, this is where people can have an inability to move on with their lives, particularly during a separation. And the other thing I'd be wary of there is, respectfully, don't rely on unqualified or inexperienced advice from friends or family. They might have your best interests at heart, but if they don't have expertise and they don't understand the nuances of what's happening in the market at the time, they can mislead you or lead you astray or lead you to have false expectations based usually on assumptions and no general specific research to support that. So again, be very careful of who you're taking your advice from, particularly if you're in a situation where you're separating or divorcing. You know, you can consequently make bad decisions by taking advice from the wrong people. So that's the selling side of it. So as you can see, it's quite complex, and there are areas where you can come unstuck. So let's talk about the home buyer's journey. And often when people are buying property, you know, the reality is you've got time poor professionals or business owners who just don't have the time to get out there and have a look around. People can be susceptible to buying poor performing property because they don't understand the attributes that differentiate an A grade property from a C grade property, and I'll show you shortly around how that can affect the value of the property over time. There's a lot of conflicting advice in the marketplace and a lot of conflicting information, and lots of people have got lots of opinions, and the media will spit out one comment today and then a polar opposite comment tomorrow. So there's a lot of anxiety that people can feel because of that conflicted information. And even just the buying process. You know, I had a client once who panicked on the morning of the auction and was having an anxiety attack around the fact that she didn't want to go through that process. So we had to work together to help her come to some conclusions and come to some solutions around her concerns so she was in a position to be able to buy. So that does happen as well. Unfortunately, mum and dad investors have spent a lot of time listening to property spruikers and going to property seminars and education events where they think that all properties make good investments or they're a good asset or it's got good capacity to perform, and that's just simply not the case. Anyone who's bought a house and land package off the plan or an apartment off the plan and suddenly it's worth less than when you bought it and you've had it for 10 years, you'll understand what I'm talking about. The other problem is there's still some underquoting going on in the marketplace, and people can still be misled and they can still pay too much, particularly if they're being emotional. Some people just simply don't know where to start or how to go about it, and that's fair enough because, again, it's a complex process. And certainly a lot of people don't know how to price property, particularly in a softening market. A lot of people say to me, well, you know, why don't we wait till the bottom of the market? But the reality is I don't know when the bottom of the market's going to be, and they don't know when it's going to be. And we're only going to know it's the bottom of the market after we've gone past it and prices start rising again. So you have to be careful around the stuff that you make up in your head to not take action or to procrastinate. And then when you do decide to buy and take action, it's really important that you understand how to price property, because there are 3 different prices. There's the price you want to pay, which is, of course, is as little as possible. There's the price that the market and comparable sales indicates what the property's worth on the market. And then, of course, there's the price to consider under competition. And if you don't take into account all of those prices, it's quite likely you'll miss out and continue to miss out. And you could potentially miss out on the perfect property just simply because you're not willing to pay what you need to pay to get it, or you don't understand what you need to pay to get it. And then again here, relying on unqualified or inexperienced friends or family for advice. Buying 1 or 2 properties in your lifetime does not make you an expert. Buying hundreds or thousands of properties does. So just keep that in mind when you're seeking some support in these areas. So let's go back to critical investment fundamentals. This is important whether you buy your first home. It's important whether you're upgrading, because of course you want to maximise the sale price of the property when it comes to selling, and you want to be able to sell in a reasonably timely manner as well. So I recommend that you take into account the land value of the property when you buy it. So I'm not talking about land size, I'm talking about land value. And if you buy an established property, the building will have already had some depreciation on it, because we know buildings depreciate. So you'll inevitably be buying a property with a higher land value than if you bought something newer off the plan. And generally anything newer off the plan or a house and land package has got a developer's margin built into it, and you're paying them a profit, so you tend to not get as much land value, and that often contributes to why they don't go up in value as much either. So keep that in the back of your mind. You also want to buy in the right location, and sure, of course, if it's your home, you want to like the suburb, but you want to take into account macroeconomic factors, things about like growth drivers such as population growth, employment opportunities, infrastructure development, even property supply. You know, there are supply and demand considerations around more and more types of property coming into the market, particularly areas where the zoning permits more and more development of apartments and high density kind of developments. And then the other thing is you want to take into account the local stuff. So local amenities, you know, schools, hospitals, public transport, shops, cafes, lifestyle component, and also the balance in the suburb of tenants versus home buyers, because they'll influence your property's ability to grow in value as well. And then property selection is critical. If you're buying an apartment that's, you know, one apartment in a group of 100 and they're all the same, we might struggle to resell it down the track. If you're buying something that is in a much smaller group and it's boutique and there's only 10 and they're all different floor plans, well, then you've got a better chance of selling down the track and getting more capital growth. So keep that in mind, because the consequences of not buying well can be substantial. And an example of that would be someone who maybe spends $400,000 on a property, and yes, they've had some capital growth, but they don't actually understand that by picking the wrong property, or a property that's not A grade, that they're leaving capital growth on the table. So an example of this here is someone who maybe buys a property that averages 3% return per annum. That's fantastic. You can see in 10, 20 and 30 years that they've made money, which is great. However, that could represent a C grade property, and instead, if they had bought an A grade property that averaged 8% per annum for the same amount of money, you can see over that 10, 20, 30-year period, that's the capital growth they've missed out on. And that's really why you're paying a buyer's advocate for their expertise to help you find those A grade properties. So while people sometimes think they're saving money doing it themselves and they're not paying an expert, this is actually how and where they pay the price down the track, but they're just not aware of it until it's too late. So maybe keep that in mind as well. So other things to be wary of when buying. Now, this applies to home buyers and investors. If you're buying regionally, don't compare regional prices to, say, a capital city, Melbourne, because you will overpay. I see it all the time when I'm buying, say, in Ballarat. Melbourne buyers come in and think, wow, that's really cheap. They pay a premium for it. Fair enough, it drives up the local Ballarat market, but they end up overpaying simply because they're comparing Ballarat with Melbourne instead of comparing Ballarat with Ballarat. Always inspect the property. It frightens me when people say they buy property without ever having seen it, because really photos can be misleading and deceptive. They can work in favour of the property, they can represent it accurately, or they can be inaccurate in terms of the representation, and that works both ways. You know, the properties can actually not show you how, the photos can actually not show you how good a property is, and sometimes it doesn't show you how bad a property is. And of course, if there's a massive electricity tower behind the property, we can be guaranteed that no photo will show that. So sometimes it's not just what the photos show you, it's what you're not seeing, where you're taking the risk of making a decision based on sight unseen. So again, always inspect the property, or if you're interested, engage a buyer's advocate to do the assessment and the negotiation for you, even if you find it yourself. Be wary of housing commission or state-owned property in the vicinity. Certainly there are suburbs and pockets of suburbs where a lot of those properties have been sold privately over the years, and they're no longer state-owned housing commission, but they might have been in the past. So do your research around that, because you don't want to end up with a neighbour that no one can ever get rid of. That can cause hassles as well. Understand that all real estate agents operate differently. So you might be dealing with one agent on one property, and their method for sale or method for presenting an offer before auction might be different to another agency. So it's really important to ask the right questions of the agents and understand how does your process work? How are you going to present my offer to the vendor? What are the rules around it? So educate yourself around that. Underquoting, unfortunately, still happens, not as much as it used to, but buyers still have to be wary about that. Always do your due diligence. You know, the old saying goes, buyer beware. And if you don't do due diligence, you're literally gambling with hundreds of thousands of dollars. So if you won't take $400,000 and go to the casino and gamble with it, then don't do that when you're buying property. Engage the right experts, do the due diligence, do the research, pay for the research, pay for the risk mitigation stuff, because you want to make sure that if you're going to spend that amount of money or millions of dollars, that you're not buying or making a mistake. So that's really important. Stay away from house and land packages. Certainly I know there's a lot of resales in the marketplace at the moment. 39% of all house and land packages for sale in around Melbourne and Geelong. As at today, we're all resale packages from people who can't settle on them or don't want to settle on them, or they were hoping to flip and make money. So be wary of that. That's something that you want to be cautious of. Asset selection is everything, as I said before. Buy for land value, not land size. Buy investment grade properties and A grade properties that have got the right attributes for capital growth. I mentioned pricing before. And the other thing is analysis paralysis. You know, if you think the market's dropping, well, as I said before, there's not just one market. And in a fast market, when you don't take action, time out of the market can cost you money. In a softer market, waiting for the bottom can mean you miss the boat. And as I said, above everything else at the moment in the marketplace, the best time to buy is when the bank will give you money, because there's no guarantee in 6 months that they'll give you what you want or when you want it. So that's the biggest thing to be aware of at the moment. So what we're going to talk about is just a couple of these common mistakes that home buyers make. Now, I do have this little guide that you can download off my website for free. I'll talk about that shortly, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of these points today. The first mistake I see people do when they're buying their property, so they're either buying a first home or they're upgrading, is they're not considering their family's future needs. So they're thinking about the next 2 or 3 years. They're not thinking about the next 5 or 10. So it's really important that, you know, even if you're single now and there's a possibility that you might be a couple and need more space, or there's a possibility that you might have kids in the next few years, try and think forward about what your needs might be. How many children might you have? Are there local school zones that you particularly want them to be in? Local amenities and employment, public transport and medical facilities. Buying for the future need now will help you save entry and exit costs down the track, because it will stop you buying and selling and buying and selling and buying and selling, because every time you do that, you've got selling costs, you've got stamp duty, and it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So just recently I worked with a couple where they've got 2 kids. They live sort of 10 kilometres, 12 kilometres north of Melbourne, but they specifically wanted to target a suburb within the Northcote school zone, and they had the budget to do that, and they're able to buy that property and rent it out for the next 5 or 6 years before they relocate the family there. So they're doing a combination of considering their future home need, but it's still an A-grade property. It's still got high rental appeal. It certainly was able to be leased before the property's even been settled, and it's proven to be a really good decision for them. So again, that future planning and minimising the amount of transactions that you'll end up doing will only end up saving you money down the track. So think about that, and if you need to push that little bit more to get there and the bank will give you the money to do so, do your cash flow considerations around it and have a think about how you might be able to make that work. Okay, the other mistake, harp on about this all the time, but I will never stop harping on about this. It's about engaging the right experts at the right time, and if you don't do that, it's often more expensive than engaging them. And I see this every time I buy property, without a doubt. Often I will be the only person who might have done a building and pest report, and there are times when I've walked away because there's been $50,000 worth of problems or $20,000 worth of problems, and someone still goes to auction and they still buy it and they still have no idea of the problems they've just purchased. So again, you want to talk to your mortgage broker, and yes, a mortgage broker, not a bank, because brokers have got access to dozens and dozens of lenders, and their job is to look across all lenders and present the best package to you. So talk to your mortgage broker and get your lending in place. If it's a home, you don't need to talk to an accountant or a financial planner. But if you're thinking you need help, it's a really good time to talk to a buyer's agent at that point in time. Make sure, of course, before you sign any kind of contract unconditionally, that you get your solicitor or conveyancer to review that contract for you. Not after the auction when you've bought it unconditionally, but before, because it's too late after. They can't do anything to help you get out of it. And certainly once a conditional contract's signed, do your building and pest inspections before auction or as a condition of your contract, because again, you want to know what you're buying. And then once the property becomes unconditional, if it's an investment property, get your property manager on board, get your quantity surveyor on board. And if it's a home, well, enjoy it and move in. So let's look at another mistake that I see all the time, and it's people becoming emotional, and this can lead to poor decisions. Now, this applies whether you're buying or selling, and I understand that both circumstances are highly stressful, but understand that when you're buying, an agent's skill set is to extract as much money from you as possible, particularly at an auction, and particularly while you're in an emotional and a vulnerable state, and that's where a lot of poor decisions can be made. So I've seen people just buy out of frustration, and often they overpay because they've had months of schlepping around, they've had no result, they've missed out time and time again, and they often end up paying more than if they had have engaged an expert at the beginning to get them the outcome in a timely manner without them having to do all the work. So be aware of that. Missing out on properties due to not pricing correctly, that's where I see people become emotional and fixed about, I think it's worth X and I'm not paying more than X. And if every single time you need to pay Z or Y and you continually miss out on property, well, then you might want to look at your own mindset around that and understand that regardless of what you think, it's how the market responds. And if you don't meet the market, you're not going to buy. Sometimes people get emotional because a property is not perfect and they miss out on opportunities that may actually be worth considering. They might walk into a place and dismiss it because a small portion of it's not as perfect as they want. But that's where you can miss out on really good buying opportunities, because sometimes it's about peeling back the layers, having a look at where you can be flexible in your buying plan, having a look at what you can do to maybe change what you don't like in the property itself, and if you could change it, would it be worth considering that? So understanding it is about give and take and flexibility, and where are you prepared to be flexible so that you give yourself greater opportunities to consider that might actually get you in the market sooner. And again, people not being able to move forward can lead to that frustration, or even procrastination can lead to that frustration. So procrastination, high emotion, frustration, again, can lead to poor decisions. And the other thing with that procrastination and delays, finance approval could fall over, or you could find yourself getting a lot less money than what you'd previously thought you qualify for, because the banks are now going through your credit card statement, they're looking at how many Uber Eats you're ordering each week, they're looking at your disposable income, and they're deciding on that basis now on how much money they're going to lend you. So that's something you need to be aware of. So emotions can lead to poor decisions and costly decisions at that. So just be aware of that. So some tips, a little bit repetitive. Don't procrastinate or overanalyze, hoping the market will improve, drop, crash, any of that. That's just an excuse to take no action. Make decisions based on actual evidence and research, not on assumptions. As I said, loan approval's king. Develop a clear buying criteria. Consider your must-haves, your non-negotiables, where you are prepared to be flexible. If you can't get more money, can you move to a neighbouring suburb? Can you buy a slightly smaller property? Can it be a different property type? So give yourself every opportunity to buy by being flexible, because, and the reality is if you've got a beer budget and champagne taste, well, you need a dose of reality. You probably won't be able to buy. So that's where you need to actually adapt to the attitude of flexibility. Develop a clear buying or auction strategy. There are different scenarios that will and do play themselves out at auction, and if you don't know how to respond to those scenarios at the time, you can come unstuck and miss out. So make sure you do that. Ensure you know the property values and correct pricely, as I talked about before. And look, if all of that's a bit too much, seek expert help from an independent buyer's advocate before you buy a property. And look, they can help you at any stage. They can do the whole search and negotiate process for you and assess, or you find the property and they can assess and negotiate, or simply they can just go and negotiate or attend an auction for you. So it doesn't have to be the full service. One thing I will say is ask for experience, and the reason I say that is there's an operator in the market now who's selling a $5,000 5-week online course on how to be a buyer's agent. The scariest thing is he's telling people they need no real estate experience, and that's absolutely not the case. You cannot be an Uber driver 1 minute, do a 5-week course, get your licence out of New South Wales, which has lower entry standards to qualify for a licence than Victoria, and then come back into Victoria, call yourself an expert buyer's agent, and then go out there potentially gambling with people's money. So anyone who's considering engaging a professional buyer's advocate, ask for their experience, ask how many years they've been doing it, ask how many properties they've bought and sold. It's like any profession. Make sure you're dealing with a professional and an expert, not just a cowboy who's coming in because they think they'll make a lot of money in a short amount of time. Now, first home buyers, the first property you buy is your stepping stone for life, so it's important to get it right. And time wasted searching and missing out can cost you money as well. So I'll give you an example of what an A-grade property looks like for a home buyer. Now, this is a client I worked with 5 years ago. She originally approached me wanting to buy a 2-bedroom apartment in Sandkuhler. I was very aware of the time that there was an oversupply of apartments being built in the area, and I was aware of the fact that an apartment has got very little land value. So we had a conversation around that. I talked about buying an investment grade property. I talked about her getting a little bit of extra money and us looking at buying her a house in a high demand area. And she fortunately took my advice, and she's probably $600,000 better off as a result. And over 5 years, she's had roughly 53.8% capital growth at the time, whereas the market's delivered an average of 38.9. So that's why understand what the difference is between an A grade and a C grade property, and that's sort of how you can be rewarded by buying an A grade instead. Now, some selling tips for success if you're going to go out there and talk to agents. So as I said, be wary. Every agent will tell you they're the best in town. Ask them why now is a good time to sell, or if it isn't a good time to sell. You don't want to deal with agents who just talk to you about every time being a good time. You want them to justify why. But remember, it's also relevant to your circumstances. You know, it's about, why do you need to sell now? What are the consequences of holding off versus selling now? Can you give it more time? Can you wait, or is there urgency around it? And make sure the agent, your point, is the one who's on the property and managing the campaign, not a junior or assistant. I see it all the time. Once they get your listing, you know, you're just part of the machine. They churn you out the other end. And, you know, you've got someone with limited experience on your property worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and they're not doing it any justice. So watch out for that one. As I said before, be careful of the marketing plan and costs they're proposing. You won't need everything they're presenting. You know, you certainly don't want a $7,000 2-page ad in a regional newspaper for a property worth $300,000. So some of it can border on negligence, for want of a better word. So make sure you understand the absolute minimum that you need to get the outcome that you're after. And when setting the reserve, consider again why you're selling and the importance of your next steps. You know, if you don't get that extra $5,000, what will that stop you from doing? How will that stop you from moving on in your life? Is it really worth hanging on to the property for $5,000 and the uncertainty that comes with it? And if it's okay to do that and you're not in a hurry, well then take that into consideration as well. Make sure you buy and sell in the same market if it's rising. And look, don't renovate your property necessarily in case a buyer may want to do it to their taste, and talk to a selling agent before you do anything on your property to get their advice, particularly the agents that you may be looking at engaging, as to what they would recommend and why. So they're going to know the local market. They're going to know what's going to appeal. Don't do a cheap job just for the sake of tarting it up when a cheap job might be worse than doing no job at all. Often people don't want to buy a property that's just had a renovated kitchen. They have to pay for that kitchen, but it's not to their taste and it's not in keeping with what the market in the area is buying. So that can be a mistake as well. So take that into account. Some examples, just quickly again, of what we've done for clients with vendor advocacy. Certainly, again, we present the good agents to our clients. In this instance, it was a strong market, and we had this incredible result at the time where the agent was able to get $125,000 over the reserve on what was a tiny little 2-bedroom apartment in a dreadful location on a really busy street next to a 7-Eleven and right on a tram stop. So the right agent selection is everything, and that was an incredible result for our client on the day. So again, if you don't understand who the good agents are, go and seek some help on that as well. So on that note, having spoken constantly for 45 minutes, who's got questions? Terry.
Thank you, Miriam. Yeah, I'll just remind people who are watching and listening that if you can just key questions into the Q&A panel or the chat panel, doesn't matter which one, I'll see them and I can put them to Miriam or perhaps answer them myself. One question we have, Miriam, is relates to this whole business of, you know, selling first or buying first when you need to relocate.
Yeah.
So the question is, how easy is it to time sort of making the two things happening at once, coordinating your sale with your new purchase? Should you even try, or is it just too hard?
Look, it really depends on the circumstances and the market you're selling from and buying into, and knowing where each market is at. There's also the risk considerations. You know, there's risk either way. If you buy first and don't sell, the risk is you might have to get bridging finance, and that could be a financial strain, and you may not qualify for the finance, and then what are the implications? If you sell first and buy later, particularly if it's in a rising market, the risk is it escalates rapidly. You don't find the property that you want, and you have to pay more for it than you expected, or you have to compromise on the property you want because your budget doesn't get you where you thought you could go. So it's really a case-by-case basis. And I know this is a general answer, but I don't know the specifics of the circumstance. If it's a relocation in the same city, if you're going from regional to metro, you know, if you're going from a lower price point to a higher price point, well, again, in an escalating market, you might want to buy first, but it depends on how hot the market is that you're looking at selling in. And if you're going from, say, Melbourne to Brisbane or Brisbane to Melbourne, again, you're buying and selling in two totally different markets. So it's understanding what's happening in the speed of each market at the time. What's your job circumstances? Is your employer going to contribute to any of the costs? What are your time frames around? Do you have to move by certain dates? Is it possible to maybe buy yourself some time and rent? So you might sell, get your money in the pocket, and then rent in your local area to get to know it better, unless you engage a local buyer's advocate in that area and give them a brief on what you want to buy. So there's just a lot to be taken into account. Again, complex scenarios, but it's knowing and understanding the risk, weighing those different risks up with your personal circumstances and even your risk profile, because whatever you do, you want to be able to sleep at night, and then making a decision around that. And it really comes down to what's best for you under the circumstances at the time.
Okay, the 5 stages of your property life, generally starting from buying your first home and then upgrading, etc. And that's probably the process that most people would go through. The question that's coming is just wanting to clarify, are you suggesting that it's actually better for people, if they can, to plan ahead and actually buy something that's going to suit their needs long term? So buy something that's actually planning ahead for the time when they might actually be starting a family and need the extra space.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can, and if your budget permits, and if you're flexible enough to be able to do it, absolutely. So I know the last property I bought, I looked at with the view to being in that potentially for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So I wanted to make sure that I was in an area that had access to public transport, to lifestyle facilities, to local shops. I really did kind of look at it that this might be my last move. I mean, it might not, but if it was going to be my last move, what did I need around me that I had access readily to, and what sacrifices were I prepared to make to put myself in that position to be in that location? So the sacrifice I made was buying a much smaller property, but it's consequently in a really good suburb and an expensive area, but it had those amenities on hand. So the thing is, when you go through these different stages, if you are buying a first home and you've got the choice of an apartment in a city or a townhouse a little bit further out, well, that might be where you buy the townhouse further out in the area you want to live in with a family where you've got access to schools, and then you just rent in an apartment in the city. So that might be the rent vesting option. You buy to your future need, even if you don't want to live there straight away. You rent it out as an investment property until you're ready to move in there. And then you just rent according to the lifestyle you want to live at the moment. And I know I did that when I first started, not when I bought my first home because I lived in it, but when I sold that and then upgraded again, I actually did rent best for a number of years in a suburb I couldn't afford to buy in, but at least I had my foot in the market. I had an apartment, I had it renting out. And slowly over time, I worked my way to the point where I got into the suburb I wanted to be in.
Okay, Tony's asking a question that refers to some of the references you made to the importance of buying A-grade property, and just is asking simply what makes an A-grade property. I know you did go into that to a certain extent in your presentation.
No, look, I think I've talked about it in previous presentations. So if you send an email, I'll try and point you to which one that is. But certainly it's the attributes of the property itself. So it's understanding, the suburb, the location in the suburb, the block itself, the property itself, the aspect of the property, the size of it, proximity to local amenity, proximity to employment. So it all comes down to land size, land value. there's a whole lot of stuff to take into consideration. Certainly what we do is we rate the properties that we buy for our clients and give them a score, and if it scores as an investment grade or an A grade property, then basically it's a tick from our point of view, but it can be quite complex. It does require a little bit of an understanding how licensed and sworn valuers appraise property and applying some of those principles to it.
In arriving at a grading for a property, do you have a checklist that you work through and to arrive at a final score for a property?
Internally we do when we're working with clients, yes.
Okay. Tammy's asking what you mean when you say underquoting is still happening.
Okay, so I'm still buying property all over Melbourne, having bought in certain suburbs over a number of years. I'm basically fully aware of where prices are sitting for certain property types in certain locations, and I still see some agents quoting under where that range should be if they were genuinely meeting the legislation. And in Victoria, the legislation, the little loophole here is that when agents put comparables up for a statement of information, they're not obligated to compare based on the property being the same land size. So I see houses, or I see townhouses, houses with townhouse comparables in a different suburb on a much smaller block of land that isn't comparable. So just genuine comparable properties aren't being used, which can still lead to underquoting.
Okay. There's a question relating to your comment about how you must always inspect the property, but referring to the difficulty if you're buying something interstate as an investor. I guess the answer is get a good buyer's agents on board and they can be your proxy in doing the things that need to be done.
Well, whether or not they'll just do that and nothing else is probably unlikely. I mean, certainly I had a client where she had a very specific need due to a disability. She had a very limited amount of money. I gave her some coaching on how to find property, what to look for, what to stay away from. So she applied that coaching, put two properties in front of me. One of them, both of them she'd inspected, but one of them we managed to talk her out of because it had a massive potential combustible cladding issue that might have come to the fore, and she couldn't afford to take that risk. And then the second property, when I assessed it for her, I was able to not just look at it and give her a rating on it in terms of did it meet her brief and was it a good property, but I was able to negotiate for her and buy it at less than what the vendor wanted and then negotiate another $2,000 worth of repairs. So all that work that I did for her was basically covered by the savings I was able to generate for her, as well as saying, yep, this is a property you want to buy. Because just looking at a property, as in does it have a good floor plan and those fundamentals, is one thing, but understanding if it's an investment grade property and a good property to buy as an investment is a whole different skill set. So while I do mean physically look at the property, yeah, if you need to engage an expert to physically look at it for you, then they may as well help you assess it and decide if it's a viable property to purchase.
Okay, just referring back to the conversation about underquoting, Douglas is asking, does underquoting apply to the selling price or the buying price?
Well, the selling price is what is quoted. It's a range that's quoted when a vendor is selling a property. So if they're quoting a range below what the agent knows the property to be actually worth, that's where underquoting comes in.
Yeah, and the legislation differs from state to state, I think, doesn't it? There's certainly been efforts in Victoria to clean that up, but I guess sharp agents will always find a way around.
Yeah, and look, the market is softening and many agents are being more realistic because there's no point overquoting in a soft market because you'll never get the buyers on board. So there's a lot more accuracy as a result of the legislation coming in, but also as a result of the market softening. But it doesn't mean that for some of those A-grade properties, they're still going to underquote to get the buyers on there because they want to sell it.
Yeah. We do have a question about changes to depreciation. I know that's not your specific area of expertise. We recently did a webinar on depreciation. Is that something you're able to comment on, Miriam?
Probably not specifically in a lot of detail. What's the actual question?
Another Miriam out there is asking, my understanding is that with the changes to depreciation, the depreciation report is only valid for properties young enough or a certain age I think the reality is the changes didn't apply to a new property. Nothing has changed there, but for properties that's not
Established.
been.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there's two parts to your building allowance and then your plant and equipment. To plant and equipment where there are changes now, I think.
That's right. So the thing about the building value is even if you have an older property that doesn't qualify for depreciation on your fixtures and fittings, you can still get depreciation on the building value. So it's still worth engaging a quantity surveyor to do that. I will come back to the fact that you don't want to buy a property for tax benefits. You want to buy a property for capital growth or income generation, and any kind of tax benefit is a benefit of investing. So if it happens to be negatively geared, that's a benefit investing. If you get big depreciation benefits, that's a benefit investing. But they're not the drivers to buy the property. That's where people make really bad, poor buying decisions. They're simply a benefit of investing, because fundamentally you don't want to buy a property if you're not going to get a really decent income or capital growth or a balance of the two.
Okay. A question, Miriam, that relates to some of your comments about particularly young buyers are finding the big city prices a little bit rich, considering buying in a regional area. The question is, how close do you think people need to be? Should they buy in a regional area that's, say, within an hour of the capital city? Like I think you referred to Ballarat and Bendigo as examples.
Yeah, Geelong, yeah. Look, I mean, certainly if you're happy to do the commute, I mean, if your options are buying 50 kilometres out of the metro city and spending 2 hours in the car each day driving in and back, versus the alternative of buying regionally and sitting on a train for an hour each way there and back while you can sit on your laptop, read a book, do whatever, that might be more appealing to you than sitting in traffic. And certainly, look, the hour threshold, I find Ballarat's doing particularly well and Geelong's doing well because it's an hour commute to Melbourne, and both of those cities are attracting a lot of Melbourne buyers from an affordability point of view. So from a resale point of view, they've got a bigger market available to them. So not just the local Geelong and Ballarat market, but also the Melbourne metro market. Bendigo, by contrast, is that bit further away. It's a longer commute, so it doesn't necessarily have as high appeal for prospective home buyers that are going to commute back and forth, but you still get the tree change buyers, the people that want to retire to those areas. So it'll come down to the individual and just their willingness to sit on a train for an hour versus the alternative of maybe sitting in a car for 2 hours each way.
Yeah. And I think people, particularly considering that regional option, right now, as far as we're concerned, hotspotting, the strongest market in Australia is regional Victoria. We're not hearing about it because media is obsessed with what's happening with the biggest cities, and particularly Sydney, where prices are falling.
Yeah.
So we're not hearing about those regional markets. But I think a key point is that they have their own economies and they're creating jobs in their own right. It's not necessarily about buying regionally and commuting to a job in the city. You can actually create a life in a Ballarat or a Geelong or Bendigo.
Yeah, and we did that regional webinar in December last year, so we've got lots of information there on what's attracting people to those areas. But certainly, it's in Ballarat, it's the hottest market I've seen in years, and I've been buying there for 6 years. And it's even for me, there's a real skill set in scrambling to get deals over the line. And I'm doing well because I've got great relationships with agents, and I'm getting away with some stuff that just makes me shake my head sometimes, which is great for my clients. But yeah, they're competitive markets, and you need to know what to buy and where to buy. But I was speaking to one of the local property managers recently, and she said there are 17 families a week moving to Ballarat, and some people are selling in Melbourne Metro and they're buying regionally because they're getting such incredible bang for buck. They've got fantastic schools there and colleges there. There's great employment opportunities. They're getting bigger houses that are more comfortable than what they were living in Melbourne, and that's their future retirement, and I've got clients who are in fact buying properties in Ballarat for future tree change retirement as well. So, whether you're a rent vestor, and I've worked with clients with small budgets who are rent vesting in Ballarat, so they forego their actual first home to rent vest, or whether you're a first home buyer buying there because of the amenity, or whether you're a downsizer who wants to buy there, certainly the affordability and the local amenity, the infrastructure development, the employment opportunities are a huge draw card. And one thing I'll still say for Victoria, Victoria itself has got more infrastructure development going on and money being spent in Victoria than the rest of the country combined. And that's contributing to why, Ballarat, Bendigo, Geelong are all doing so well.
Yeah, there was actually an article that came through in our research this morning, Miriam, talking about how well Victoria and Melbourne stacks up as a long-term investment, and it's very much about population growth, which consistently is the strongest in the nation. Very strong infrastructure spending, which you've just referred to. And it presented some long-term growth figures showing that over the past 20 years, Melbourne's actually outperformed all other Australian cities, including Sydney, by quite some considerable margin. It's grown on average 275%. With its property prices, according to this measure. There's all sorts of different figures out there, but 275% in the past 20 years, which is well above the national average, which is 195%. So.
Yeah, and we've basically had 1 million people more or less move here in the last 10 years. Our population will outstrip that of Sydney at some point in time because we have so much land available where we can continue to develop and grow, whereas Sydney is obviously quite landlocked. So there is a point in time where we will be the biggest, most populous capital in the city, and I hope to hell we've got all the train works and road works and infrastructure works done in Melbourne as soon as possible before that happens, because we need it.
Yeah. Okay, Miriam, we're just coming up to the hour, so it's probably a nice time to bring the webinar to an end. What should people do if they want to follow up? And I'm sure a lot of people listening in today or listening into a recording later through various social media outlets. What should they do if they want to follow up and make contact with you?
Yeah, well, look, if you want some help buying or selling, you can see that we're happy to offer free consultation on our website for anyone to do that. There are also free resources you can download. So if you just go onto the homepage and look at that resource section or the contact section, you'll find this little 7 common mistakes that home buyers make and how to avoid them. And of course, there's one there for investors too. So click on that and download that. You can also rate your property expertise. That's just to test how much your property knowledge will serve you if you're going to go out and buy a property. That's a free test you can do there. And then if you need some help buying or selling, you can click on the contact button and fill in a free consultation, and we'll be in touch with you. And of course, there's my email address and our phone number if you also want to ring and contact us that way as well.
Okay, so thank you, Miriam, again. Always enjoy doing webinars with you because I know it's going to be great information, good articulation of that information based on skill and experience that you've spent in the market serving buyers and sellers. So thanks again for a great webinar. Personally, I took 6 pages of shorthand notes, which I'm sorry, I'm a habitual note taker, and I have the rare skill of taking shorthand, which not many people have.
I know, Terry, I'm very impressed with that. The fact that you can take shorthand and you're still applying it, I think is fantastic, and a skill you should never let go of.
It's a great skill. Yep.
It's a great skill. I just have to be careful what I say around you now that I know that you constantly take notes in shorthand. Yes,
well, I'll be turning this material into all sorts of useful things for both of us in the way of follow-up articles, etc. So
fantastic.
Thanks again for a great webinar. Thanks everyone who tuned in, and thanks for your questions. So hope you found it really useful. I certainly did. I learned a lot. I always do when I do a webinar with Miriam. So thanks for your attendance. This is Terry Ryder from Hotspot and signing off. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for your time. Really appreciate it. Know how valuable it is, and thanks Terry for the opportunity.
Sure.